Ernest Dade, a Yorkshire sea painter. An audio-visual preservation of an obituary of the renowned maritime artist with various notes. Sometime in the last decade, I think it was that one, the author purchased via auction a copy of Ernest Dade's book Sail and Oar, which turned out to have within it a couple of copy letters and obituaries written by Peter Anson, who had authored Sail and Oar alongside Dade's illustrations. As well as Anson's letters, there are a pair involving the late Colonel J. F. Wilcox, who informs us he is Dade's great-nephew by marriage. In 1986, Colonel Wilcox, as he was then, was in correspondence with Arthur Credland at Hull Museum, and the reply from Mr. Credland you would expect to be in Colonel Wilcox's hands, and thus this material seems to have come into his care. Arthur Credland wrote to Colonel Wilcox the following: Dr. Robert Prescott of the Scottish Maritime Institute and trustee of the Anstruther Fisheries Museum, on a recent visit, expressed great interest in the model of a Fifies made by Ernest Dade. There is apparently only one other model surviving of this pre-1870s type of Fifies extant. I wonder whether you can give me any further information as regards the year and the circumstances of its construction. Is it perhaps a model of the small Scottish fishing vessel North Star, which Dade converted into a yacht? The evidence of the various articles published by the artist in the Mariner's Mirror shows that he built a number of models of cobles, yawls, etc. Do you have any knowledge of the fate of these? Also, are there any surviving drawings or paintings of Scottish craft from his hand? In 2001, Lieutenant Colonel Wilcox wrote to the National Maritime Museum to ask whether you might be interested in accepting a model of a sailing ship built for my cousins in about 1920 by Ernest Dade, my great-uncle by marriage. I enclose a copy of his obituary notice in case you do not know of him. As you will see from this, he built the model ships for the Wembley exhibition. I also enclose some photographs of the boat from which you will see that it needs a fairly extensive refit. The masts and some of the spars and sails are original. The overall length of the hull is 45 inches. I have offered the model to the Hull Museum, who already have a number of Dade's pictures and models, but they tell me they would not be able to carry out the necessary work of restoration. If you would like to have the model, it would come as a free gift. I shall be grateful to know what you feel about this suggestion, as we'll soon no longer be able to house the model, and it would be a pity if it were just thrown away. Peter Frederick Charles Anson, 22nd of August 1889 to 10th July 1975. In 1936, Anson moved to the northeast of Scotland, his mother's country of origin, living at Macduff, Banffshire, from 1937 to 1952. And becoming involved in the early activities of Scottish nationalism. His acquaintance there included Neil M. Gunn and Compton Mackenzie. Source: Wikipedia. Harbour Head, Macduff, Banffshire, 30th October 1946. Dear Mrs. Dade, I was interested to see that you are back in the studio flat where I used to visit you and Ernest 15 and more years ago. Only the other day I was wishing that I could get hold of one of Ernest's fishing boat models to complete the maritime background of what the local boys call the wee kirkie, otherwise a tiny oratory which I have fitted up at one end of the loft, running the length of this fisherman's cottage. On either side, beneath the eaves, are the oars, sails and other gear of Stella Maris, now laid up for the winter. Alongside them are my lobster creels, ropes, etc. On each side of the diminutive altar are two model fishing boats, one a big Zulu, the other a badly built scaffy of about half a century ago. A small model of Anson and a Danish motor ship rest on a beam with the cross between them. At the feet of a statue of Our Lady of Boulogne, in her boat, which has just arrived from France, are 6 small model battleships and cargo vessels made for me by local youths. On the stairs hangs a collection box for the Apostleship of the Sea, the Catholic missions to seamen, and it is most surprising how much money is dropped into it by the visitors. What a pity I did not know that you were in London last month, when I was there for a few days. Having spent over £25 on railway journeys during 4 weeks moving around England and Scotland, I don't feel inclined to spend another £7 on the return fare to London, even to visit the Society of Marine Artists exhibition, which is to be held at the Guildhall next month. Although I regret missing it, I might pick up some useful hints from looking at the work of other artists. If I can procure enough frames, I hope to hold a one-man show in London next February, and have made preliminary arrangement with the Foyle Gallery in Charing Cross Road, for lack of any better place. I would have been delighted to have given you any advice about the lectures and models, also to meet you again after all these years. Mr. Ernest Dade. Mr. Ernest Dade, whose death at Langford Place, St. John's Wood, is announced, was a painter of considerable ability and an excellent maker of ship models. He was one of Mr. Cecil King's assistants in the ship model department at the Wembley exhibition, and rigged many of the Armada and other models. Recently he published a book of his early sketches of fishing craft under the title With Sail and Oar. His pictures usually represented subjects of this kind, which he generally found on the Yorkshire coast. He was a member of the Chelsea Arts Club and of the Anchorites. Membership to the Anchorites is open to anyone who is interested or connected to the sea. It still exists, and current members include serving and retired members of the Royal Navy, serving and retired personnel from the Merchant Navy, those connected with the leisure and boating industry, shipping brokers, marine insurance brokers, marine artists, all media, maritime historians and documentary makers, rowers and oarsmen / women, yachtsmen and women, divers and salvage operators. Ernest Dade attended Scarborough School of Art from 1885 to 1886. He studied under Albert Strange. The Scarborough School of Arts later became the Scarborough Technical College. In 1886 he was part of the student body receiving examination results. On Saturday 10th of April 1886 the York Herald reported that the following is the list of the prize winners. Government prizes, advanced stages, Caleb Keane, free scholarship, decorative design, ditto, third grade prize, decorative design, John H. Unreadable, National Book Prize, anatomical studies. The following also gained third grade prizes: E. Dade, still life painting, oil, ditto, watercolour, Edward J. Head, still life oil, Gertrude Spur, watercolour, Mary A. C. Bauer, still life, water, Thomas F. Hutton, oil painting, Alice Mallory, oil painting, Ellen Robinson, watercolour, Edith Robinson, oil painting, Margaret Sissons, watercolour. Second grade prizes: Alice E. Luxton, freehand drawing, Ernest Dade, model drawing, Alice M. Mallory, ditto, Edwin Ryby, geometry, Georgina Glaves, perspective, Thomas F. Button, ditto, science prize: Sidney Tugwell, set of drawings, building construction. Local prizes for students who obtained the largest number of marks for their works: Clara K. Burniston, 15 marks, Elizabeth Beeley, 8, Charles Battersley, 8, John York, 8, Francis Chompley, 7, Maud Robinson, 6, George Bradley, 6, Headmaster's Prize, Helen James, 20 marks. Interestingly, the article describes the financial difficulties experienced by the Scarborough School of Art, and a list of Scarborough's wealthy benefactors follows, including the man who was to be his future father-in-law, and with whom relations were not good. To meet this large deficit, the committee state that the following donations have been promised: the Mayor, Mr. Joshua Rowntree, £200, Mr. W. S. Kane, £100, Mr. J. W. Woodall, J.P., £60, Messrs. Marshall and Snellgrove, £50, Mr. F. Bright, Hon Treasurer, £50, Mr. G. Alderson-Smith, £25, and Mr. G. L. Barforth, £10. Albert Strange began his work at the Scarborough School of Art in 1882. Wikipedia entry. The Albert Strange Association exists to trace, record, and so far as it is within our power, preserve the designs, boats, artworks and writings of Albert Strange, and to make a permanent record of his life and work. Dade married Maud Alderson-Smith in St Martin's Church, Scarborough in 1913. Wikipedia entry. Drawings of the Whitby herring fishery were exhibited by Dade in 1888, reported in the Brighouse and Rastrick Gazette, 14th January 1888. Christmas exhibition at the Howard Gallery. River and sea pieces, they are very well handled and successful. A pleasing example of Mr. William Keeling's handiwork is his When the Tide is Out, Heysham. A dozen watercolours by Mr. Alwyn H. Holland, for exhibition only, are very attractive. A clever sketch of sunrise over the Thames is especially pleasing, and the ragworts is a vivid bit of colouring. A grey day Barmouth affords the contrast of a quieter style. Mr. J. H. Bentley and Mr. J. G. Sykes among the other local artists represented. Watercolours by George Clowes, A.R.A., James Moore, Ernest Dade, and oils by Josie Weiss, W. Mounsey, T. Davidson and many others are also to be seen. The exhibition also contains some beautiful Saturday 21st January 1888, Illustrated London News. In the same gallery are to be seen a series of drawings by Mr. Ernest Dade, illustrative of the Whitby herring fishery, sunny, bright and facile sketches. The York Herald reported on Thursday the 2nd of May 1889, Scarborough artists and the Royal Academy. Scarborough is very well represented this year in the Royal Academy, fully half the pictures sent having found a place, and few small towns will be able to boast so creditable a show. Exhibiting at the Royal Academy in 1906, a Manchester Courier reporter wrote in the 2nd June issue that fishing boats going to sea by Mr. Ernest Dade is effective, if somewhat unpleasant in tone. The grey atmosphere does not envelop nor soften the hard hues and lines. 1908. Dade is mentioned in the Grimsby News on Friday 20th November and on Wednesday 2nd December in the newspaper The Bystander, where Dade's work is referenced with regard to the season's weather. The London Evening Standard reported on Monday 8th July 1912 that at the Old Picture Shop 175 The Strand there is an exhibition of paintings and drawings by Mr. Ernest Dade, best known for his pictures of North Sea life. Mr. Dade has a true feeling for weather and an intimate knowledge of boats and his work in both oils. Not all newspaper reporters were willing to creditability in the ego-driven world of the arts and the avant-garde. Winter art exhibitions. The winter art exhibitions are now fairly started, and from now until next July there will be a constant succession of appeals to purchasers' pockets and to collectors' fancy. Of this Institute, notice is made elsewhere, and it is enough to say here that, taken as a whole, its show is as much below as that of the British artists is above the standard of recent years. The cause is not far to seek, for the old society, which is now celebrating its 100th exhibition, is more ready to admit newcomers than its younger rival, which is not yet in its teens. Another point is that the British artists seem more Catholic in their taste, otherwise it would be hard to understand the admission of such work as Mr. Runney's Intruders, number 203, or Mr. Ernest Dade's Trawlers, number 144, which would probably look in vain for hospitality on the walls of any other gallery in London. It must not, however, be supposed that eccentricity alone furnishes a right of admission to the Society of British Artists. Model making for the British Empire exhibition at Wembley. A room on the top floor of the War Office has been taken over for the purpose of making models, to be exhibited at Wembley for the forthcoming exhibition. It is entitled the Wembley Room, and many interesting models both of historical and geographical interest are being made by a small army of experienced model workers. Indecipherable. A model showing ancient and modern warships. On the right is seen a model of HMS Vindictive, the boat of Zeebrugge fame, and on the left, indecipherable, receiving finishing touches one of the old wooden walls, the Triumph. Friday the 4th of November 1932, Liverpool Journal of Commerce review of books refers to an article by Ernest Dade. Among the articles in the current issue are Trawling Under Sail on the North East Coast by Ernest Dade. After Dade's death in 1936, the Western Mail pointed out that Dawson, a great companion of Dade's, and Dade did not have sufficient focus placed on their life experiences. 'Tis a pity the catalogue does not point the interest in the artists themselves. Dawson, for instance, was born at sea. Ernest Dade built and rigged the King's ships throughout the century for the Wembley exhibition of 1924-25. Saturday, 16th of May 1936. A short list of other entries for Ernest Dade via the British Newspaper Archive. Published Monday, 6th May 1912, newspaper Newcastle Daily Chronicle. Published Tuesday, 3rd of May 1892, newspaper Northern Echo. Wednesday, 2nd of August 1933, newspaper The Yorkshire Post and Leeds Intelligencer. Published Saturday, 10th April 1886, newspaper York Herald. Published Saturday, 14th January 1888, newspaper Brighouse and Rastrick Gazette. Ernest Dade, a Yorkshire Sea Painter, by Peter F. Anson, author of Fisherman and Fishing Ways, Fishing Boats and Fisher Folk on the East Coast of Scotland, etc. Many Yorkshiremen of the older generation will regret to hear that Ernest Dade, the well-known marine artist, died on November 3rd, 1935 after a brief illness. He was born in London in 1865. His father, Frederick Dade, being a portrait painter. The family moved to Yorkshire when Ernest was a child, and he himself grew up at Scarborough, where he had every opportunity to satisfy his love of boats and ships. The old harbour and the foreshore were his favourite playgrounds, the sailors and fishermen his constant companions and friends. Even as a boy he showed promise of unusual talent in drawing, but the call of the sea was then more powerful than art. So Ernest Dade went to sea for a time. After a while he abandoned this life and went to Paris, where he studied at Julien's well-known studio. Later, he was learning mural decorations and fresco painting with French artists in the south of France. I have been told that some of his work can still be seen at Monaco. During his stay on the coast of Provence, Dade was able to indulge his passion for boat sailing. He was never happier than when cruising around that lovely coast or among the romantic islands of Hyeres. And never was he without a sketchbook, which he would fill up with rapid notes of the sea, sky and ships. On his return to England, Dade settled in Chelsea, where he was associated with artists of the late 1880s in Manresa Road Studios. For some time he shared a studio with Nelson Dawson, ARWS-RWA, another well-known marine painter and etcher. One of his friends, C.W. Adderton, a Yorkshire artist who now lives at Robin Hood's Bay, informs me that, about 1892, he and Dade invested in a small Scottish fishing vessel, North Star, which they converted into a yacht. They cruised around the coast together, using her as a floating studio. So, as years went on, Dade was gradually storing up a deep and intimate knowledge of the sea in all its moods, based on constant observation and sketches, that was to bear fruit later in the wonderful paintings, both in oil and watercolour. He spent some years at Staithes, where, about 30 years ago, there was quite a colony of young artists, many of whom have since become world famous, including Dame Laura Knight, R.A., Royal Academy, and Frank Mason, R.I., Royal Institute. In 1913, Dade married Miss Maud Alderson-Smith of Scarborough, eventually making their permanent home in London, where his genial personality secured for him a wide circle of friends. He exhibited occasionally at the Royal Academy, Grosvenor Gallery, New Gallery, Royal Society of British Artists, and elsewhere. But he was always far more interested in his art for its own sake than in making a name for himself. So just because of this, together with a lack of the publicity sense, which brings other less capable artists into the limelight, Dade's work never obtained the official recognition it deserved. Besides being a marine painter of outstanding merit, worthy of a place amongst the foremost English maritime artists of the last century, Dade was a capable ship modeller. Examples of his models can be seen in the New York Yacht Club, Royal United Service Institute, and in many private collections. He built and rigged the King's ships throughout the centuries for the Wembley exhibition in 1924, later on building Elizabethan models for the Department of Overseas Trade. Dade's models possess a rare combination of technical accuracy with a living quality, usually to be found only in a seagoing vessel. Somehow or other, he managed to put the soul into these little ships. In 1932 he published Sail and Oar, J.M. Dent, 7 shillings 6pence net, a collection of 100 drawings of boats, men and methods of fishing in the North Sea before iron, steam and the internal combustion engine revolutionised the fishing industry. The drawings are based on sketches done between 1880 and 1900. This fascinating book will always remain of unique value to the student of the maritime history of Great Britain. It forms a permanent record of a phase of our nautical annals which has passed away forever. The Yorkshire coast is lucky to have found such a capable historian of her splendid seafaring sons and the marvellous little craft in which they sailed. Dade's drawings have that peculiar value which only exists when done without the aid of the camera. I shall always remember a certain occasion when Dade remarked to me, "Pooh, you young men today needn't bother about learning to draw as we had to do when I was a lad. Why, all you want is a good camera and some snapshots. That's the way you study the sea. We had to keep our eyes open and remember what we saw." Any Yorkshireman old enough to recall what Scarborough, Whitby, Staithes and Robin Hood's Bay looked like 40 years ago will value Sail and Oar. Its pictures will conjure up memories of the great fleet of Scottish Zulus and Fifies packed tight like sardines in Scarborough harbour, and whose masts suggested nothing so much as a forest of tall trees. There are the gaily painted cobles with their brown sails, the crowds of Yorkshire fishermen mingling with the Gaelic-speaking lassies from the West Islands of Scotland. Indeed, you can almost smell the herring itself as it lay rotting in the hot sunshine of an August morning. One of the most charming features of this book is the foreword, contributed by Frank Wheeler, an old Filey fisherman, who gives his honest opinion that the pictures are true in every way, and he ought to know what he is talking about. Throughout the 70 years of his life, Dade has given his best to record the sea and its myriad moods, the North Sea which fascinated him since boyhood. He could not bear to be separated from her even in death, and he expressed a wish, which has been carried out, that his body should be cremated and the ashes cast on the waves from the end of Scarborough Pier. If you knew Ernest Dade, you could understand why.